Number 10. Death in El Dorado Canyon. A climber was discovered dead at the El Dorado Canyon in Colorado. According to the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, a call came in at around 6 o'clock at night from a group of climbers who discovered the body of Scott Dewey. He was alone, not breathing, and had no pulse. There was no evidence of foul play, and it quickly became apparent that he had died while solo climbing up the side of a cliff. There were no ropes found, no harnesses, and he had no protection of any kind. This is something called free soloing, in which a climber has nothing but shoes and a chalk bag. It's the most dangerous form of climbing that a person can do. The people who came across his body never heard or saw the fall. They were just unfortunate enough to find the corpse. The accident appeared to be recent. Just a few hours had gone by before he was found. Once his identity was confirmed, the authorities learned that Scott was a dedicated climber who spent a lot of time in El Dorado Canyon. He frequently climbed by himself just for the thrill of it. And to be honest, this is a dangerous enough canyon even when you have safety protection. Just before Scott's fatal fall, two different climbers who had the proper safety equipment fell when one of their anchors ripped. They fell down 100 feet to the ground below and died instantly. And 2 years before that, in 2019, a different free solo climber also fell to their death here. All of these deaths make the El Dorado Canyon one of the most dangerous places to climb in all of Colorado. Number 9. The Climbing Prodigy, Lucy Douadi. A French climbing prodigy named Lucy Douadi fell 500 feet to her brutal death after she slipped from a path while walking up to a cliff. The French teenager, only 16 years old, was already a climbing champion at the time of her death. She was walking with a group of friends through the French Alps to a climbing spot when she slipped off the path. This was tragic and a little ironic. It would be one thing if she fell from an extreme height while attempting a brave solo climb, but it seems unbelievable that she died while walking with her friends. People who knew Lutz said that she was bound to be an Olympian and was hoping to compete as a climber at the Tokyo Games. She was part of a French climbing team. She had a bronze medal from a European event, and she had a junior world championship title. She has been described as full of energy, passionate, and wildly talented. The fall happened when Luce was walking across an exposed path near Crolles and St. Pancras. Even though she wasn't climbing, it was still a dangerous area to walk. There were no guardrails, and the edge of the path was right beside her. What she should have done was secure her cable to the makeshift handrail as she walked across, but she didn't, likely because she had been there multiple times before and was confident enough to do it by herself. But her foot slipped out from under her. She went over the edge, and all the experience in the world couldn't save her. The next 10 seconds must have been terrifying as she plummeted all the way down to the ground. Number 8. Mexican climbing fail. The American free solo climber Brad Gobright died in Mexico while trying to descend down the side of a sheer cliff face. Brad had already climbed up the cliff in El Potrero Chico, one of the most popular destinations for rock climbers in northern Mexico. It was coming down that proved troublesome. At the time, Brad was climbing with Aiden Jacobson, another American solo climber. Aiden had ventured into the mountains for a 3-week-long trip and had bumped into Brad somewhere along the way. They started climbing together. They were having an awesome time exploring the wilderness, and then disaster struck. The pair were descending at about 3:30 in the afternoon, but their route down the cliff was poorly chosen, and both of them lost their footing and fell. While Brad tumbled about 900 feet to his death, Aiden only fell a short distance. Aiden injured his ankle and was a little banged up, but he survived. Brad, on the other hand, may as well have jumped off the top of Mount Everest. He hit the ground at terminal velocity and made a bloody mess on the rocks. Number 7. Surviving the impossible. On the morning of April 11, 2021, a group of climbers was getting ready to scale the After 7 route at Yosemite National Park. As they were getting ready, they saw a lone climber heading for an extremely challenging route called the Nutcracker. Both the group and the solo climber were scaling the Manure Pile Buttress, which is located on Yosemite's north side. It's a 600-foot rock formation that usually takes climbers a full day to get to the top of. It is dangerous, but it's not the most dangerous, and for this reason, it's wildly popular with free soloists. As the group of climbers were busy making their way to the top, just shortly after seeing the solo climber take a different route, they heard shouting from below. The noise was somebody to call for 911. As it turned out, the solo climber had fallen somewhere between 150 and 200 feet and broke themselves on the ground. The solo climber was Josh Orada from the California area. He had climbed the exact same route before, both using safety equipment and not using safety equipment. Never before had he had an accident. The really amazing part is that Josh survived. Normally, if somebody falls 200 feet straight down, they crack open like an egg. But in the case of Josh, he only suffered a few injuries. A helicopter was able to take him to the nearest hospital, where doctors discovered that he shattered his right heel, sprained his ankle, fractured his pelvis, broke some ribs, collapsed one of his lungs, and broke his thumb. He had to have surgery to fuse his spine and to put plates and pins in his thumb and in his heel, but he did survive. Have you ever been scared for your life while climbing? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. A dramatic rescue. While Emily Harrington was trying to climb El Capitan at Yosemite National Park, she took a tumble. The 33-year-old climber was with her boyfriend, another climber named Adrian Ballinger, and their friend Alex Honnold. Alex and her boyfriend were obsessed with becoming the first people to climb El Capitan without using a rope. Emily Harrington was also interested in getting to the top of El Capitan freestyle, no ropes and no safety. An experienced climber, Emily had already scaled Mount Everest, the Ama Dablam mountain in Nepal, and the lesser-known Cho Oyu. But El Capitan holds a certain appeal to climbers because it's 3,000 feet of vertical climbing. It's extremely challenging and horribly dangerous. Alex had already been preparing to climb it solo for 2 years. Emily was 100 feet below Alex when he heard her scream. Keep in mind that this wasn't completely without safety equipment. They were climbing using a technique called simul climbing. It's where they put their equipment very spread out. The result here is that there are huge gaps between safety points, but the climbers can move much quicker. It's the next most dangerous thing to free climbing. When Emily fell, Alex was able to quickly reach out and grab a rope, which saved her life. If he hadn't grabbed the rope instinctively as he saw it falling beside him, because of the huge gaps between placements, she would have splattered on the ground. Instead, she banged her head on a rock, suffered some minor scrapes and bruises, but was otherwise perfectly fine. She's even said that she still plans on climbing El Capitan solo in the future. Number 5. Dead in Tennessee. Tennessee probably isn't the first place you think of when somebody mentions mountain climbing, and yet Tennessee was the recent location of a terrifying death of a beloved rock climber. We don't know his name, but the National Park Service has said that he was a 34-year-old guy from Colombia. He was climbing at the Big South Fork National River when he plunged 100 feet off the side of a cliff to his death. When the National Park officials went to investigate, they realized that the climber hadn't been using any of the proper ropes or pieces of equipment. He was free soloing. This park is home to the Twin Arches, arguably one of the most impressive geological features anywhere in the eastern United States. The arches are also popular for rock climbers, since the tallest is only about 103 feet. It can easily be climbed in just a few hours, even if you're not super experienced. People climb it despite the fact that climbing is prohibited in most areas of the park. You're not allowed to climb on the arches or most of the cliffs, especially because they're made of loose and soft rocks. This makes them wildly unstable and dangerous. For our unfortunate free climber, he found out just how dangerous the hard way. Number 4. Dead in the water. 2 climbers from the United States were soloing off the coast of Majorca when something went wrong and they fell into the water. To understand this a bit better, keep in mind that the cliffs of Majorca, located in Spain, overlook the ocean. It's a beautiful place, but it's also extremely dangerous to be free climbing. According to authorities in Spain, both American men arrived at the climbing site from Barcelona hours before their accident. They haven't been named for privacy reasons. As they began to climb the treacherous cliffs, something happened that caused them both to fall off and hit the water. Both men hit the ocean so hard that they broke their bodies and were unable to keep their heads above the surface. If they didn't die from their injuries, they died from drowning. Their bodies were discovered by swimmers who alerted the lifeguard, but the lifeguard was unable to resuscitate either of the men, and they are pronounced dead at the scene. Number 3. Straight down the mountain. Austin Howell was known for being one of the most courageous solo climbers anywhere in the world, but his current ended up getting him dead when he fell while climbing the Short-Off Mountain in North Carolina. He was only 31 years old at the time of his death, falling at an unspecified time in the late morning. Rescue crews had to rappel down the side of the mountain to reach his body. The other climbers beat them to it and tried to perform CPR to resuscitate him, but because he fell and broke himself, likely collapsing both of his lungs, there wasn't much that CPR could do. While nobody knows exactly how high up he was, other climbers believe he was about 20 feet from the top. They looked up and saw him there, and the next second, his body was streaking to the bottom. They never even heard him scream, suggesting he just kind of accepted what was happening as he fell and closed his eyes and welcomed the warm embrace of death. Number 2. Swept away. Michael Reardon was a lot of things. He loved free soloing. He was a motivational speaker. He wrote in his spare time, and he even made films. The American climber was 42 years old when he traveled to Ireland to climb up the side of the sea cliff in County Kerry. He had decades of experience climbing rocks without using harnesses or ropes. He was the real definition of a professional, and that makes his death in 2007 so ironic. You see, it wasn't the cliff that killed him, but a wave. As Michael was scaling up the side of the sea cliff, a wave jumped out of the sea, knocked him off the rock, and then swallowed him down to its icy depths. He was reported missing after witnesses saw him fall into the water. But despite the help from the Irish Coast Guard, his body couldn't be found. They searched all along the cliffs and in the water, but Michael's body was never recovered. Before long, it had probably turned into fish food. Number 1. Too young to climb. An Italian climbing prodigy named Tito Claudio Traversa was one of the youngest skilled climbers to ever be born. He climbed his first cliff at the age of 10, and by the age of 12, had become an insanely skilled climber. But in 2003, his life as a climber was cut tragically short when he fell 50 feet and died. Tito was climbing in France at the time, and French officials doing the investigation found that his equipment had been assembled incorrectly. Little to his knowledge, he had been free climbing completely by accident. 8 out of his 10 quick draws were assembled in such a way that they could not support his weight if he fell. And fell he did. He expected to be kept safely in place by his equipment, but the quick draws and carabiners were all wrong, and so he plummeted to the ground. The only silver lining here is that because this is France, everyone involved has been seriously punished. 5 people were charged with manslaughter: the owner of the company that produced the equipment, the owner of the shop that sold the equipment, the manager who organized the climbing trip, and 2 instructors who were present at the time. All 5 of them were charged with manslaughter for failing to check the boy's equipment, resulting in his death.
10. The tragic death of Victoria Strauss. On the night of January 18, 2021, in Columbus, Ohio, Victoria Strauss was killed. The tragic accident involved Victoria, her car, and a pavement kiosk in a parking garage. At just 23 years old, Victoria died from mechanical asphyxiation. It happened when her head got jammed between her vehicle and the payment machine in the parking garage. She was trying to pay for parking when she somehow slipped her head out of her vehicle, wedged it tightly against the machine, and couldn't get it unstuck. Victoria died at 11:37 at night and wasn't found until the next day at 5:40 in the morning. A security guard saw her body stuck between the car and the machine and called the police. When the police did their autopsy, they couldn't find any drugs in her system, but the coroner did note a blood alcohol level of 0.221. So it's not like it was a freak accident, perhaps just more of an intoxicated one. Regardless of if Victoria had been drinking before driving into the parking lot, we know everything that happened thanks to the security footage. As she was trying to pay, she dropped her card on the ground. This may have been because she was drinking, we don't really know. She opened her door to pick her card up and at the same time accidentally accelerated. Her car hit the payment kiosk. Her head got wedged between her open door and the frame, and she stopped moving. 9. Early morning attack in Dublin. Gareth Kelly was stabbed to death at 7 o'clock in the morning as he was trying to start his car. It happened in Dublin, Ireland on Tuesday, February 25, 2020. The aggressor in this situation was Christina Anderson. Christina walked out of her house, leaving her husband and children inside, and approached Gareth calmly and killed him. This was horrible from every front. First of all, Gareth and Christina didn't even know each other. The two had never met in their life. Gareth had no idea what was about to happen to him. He had opened up the hood of his car to look at the engine because his car wouldn't start. He saw Christina coming but didn't know who she was or what she wanted. He may even have thought she was coming to help. But those thoughts left his brain immediately as she plunged the knife into him over and over again. According to the Irish Times, the motivation for Christina's brutal crime was a parking space. Gareth had spent the night at his partner's house in the same area as the apartment complex and had apparently taken the wrong parking space. Christina was allegedly so furious that someone had parked in the wrong spot that she waited until they came back to their car to murder them. Cue the Psycho theme song. She has since been taken into psychiatric care, and all this time later is still waiting to be sentenced for her crime. 8. Brawl at Costco. In a Costco parking lot in Mississauga, Ontario, a brawl erupted over a disagreement. It was a weekend in 2016, and nobody had any idea what COVID was yet. To be quite honest, nobody really knew quite how good they had it at that moment. And yet, a couple of people just couldn't get along, all over a parking spot. The disagreement ended in a ridiculous outburst of anger and fist flying. It all started when a man named Joe Carriero was walking back to his car after getting some great deals at Costco. Why else would anybody go to Costco except for the great deals on 300 rolls of toilet paper? His arms were filled with his bulk purchases when he stopped in his tracks. His car had been blocked by two groups arguing over a parking spot. Naturally, Joe took out his phone and started filming the two parties as they screamed at each other. You know the world loves and hates to see this sort of thing. What began with a lot of yelling and pushing ended with one man having an open cut across his head and the rest of the group being subdued by the Costco employees. Nobody was seriously injured, but considering the video went viral across Canada, pretty sure they were all very embarrassed. Joe handed the video over to the police as evidence, but nobody was ever charged with anything. For Mississauga, it was just another day at Costco. 7. The terrible shooting of Marquis McLaughlin. 28-year-old Marquis McLaughlin was in a parking lot on July 19, 2018. The parking lot was in Clearwater, Florida, a place where the local government still upholds the highly controversial Stand Your Ground law. This law affords citizens the opportunity to defend themselves with deadly force should they feel as if their life is in danger. The issue is that there are different interpretations of danger, and some people say they feel threatened enough to justify a murder. Marquis was shot by a man named Michael Draka in the parking lot. Just before the shooting, Michael had approached Marquis's girlfriend because she had parked in a disabled parking spot and didn't have a placard hanging in her window. We're sure most of us can sympathize with this situation. You see somebody parking in a spot clearly marked for disabled people and you get angry. What if somebody that's actually disabled needs the spot? But things escalated. Marquis got angry back and shoved Michael to the ground as if he was going to beat him up. While lying on his back, Michael drew his handgun and pointed it at Marquis. Marquis was backing away when Michael pulled the trigger and put a bullet in him. Marquis would later die in the hospital from his injuries, and it would turn out that he had been unarmed at the time of the shooting. Michael was not immediately charged for murder. He got away, at first, using the Stand Your Ground law. But after an investigation and a very long trial, he was convicted of manslaughter on August 23, 2019. His sentence was 20 years in prison. Do you think 20 years in prison was too long of a sentence for Michael? Should he have gotten away with murder using the stand your ground law? Let us know your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. 6. Killed over a parking space. Here we go again. On January 24, 2021, Kiana Singleton was gunned down following a dispute over a parking space. It happened at the M-Bar Sports Grill in Jackson. Her family is desperate for answers, especially considering the circumstances surrounding the shooter. Kiana was killed by Eugenia Funches, a woman who was already out on bond in connection with a different murder in 2019 in Clinton. She had gotten released on a $50,000 bond and was supposed to be home every night before her 10 p.m. curfew. Yet the incident occurred just before 3 o'clock in the morning. Kiana's family is furious that a woman already involved in a murder case was allowed to wander around free and kill their innocent daughter. Kiana was just trying to have a fun night out at a sports grill. As for how the shooting happened in the first place, like I said, it was over a parking space. The two women got into a verbal argument, but then they seemed to go their own separate ways. What Kiana didn't know was that Eugenia was following behind her in a Range Rover. Eugenia pulled up behind Kiana and fired wildly into her vehicle, killing her on the spot. 5. A freak accident. Yet another driver has died in a freak accident while simply trying to park their vehicle. This time it happened at about 9:45 on January 23, 2017. A driver in Brooklyn was trying to park his vehicle, a Toyota Sienna LE, on the side of the road when he got his body stuck between his car door and a tree. How it happened is nothing short of extraordinary. You see, Chen Zeng Lin needed to move his vehicle across the street to avoid getting a ticket because he would have been blocking the street sweepers. He got into his vehicle and, instead of using his rearview mirror, popped his head out of the door and reversed. It proved to be the last mistake he would ever make. His head got caught between the frame of the vehicle and a London plane tree. The poor man never saw it coming and probably never even knew what happened. According to eyewitness and neighbor Mark Sarachik, there was blood gushing out of Chen's mouth. He looked like a blood fountain from some terrible horror movie. The EMTs did try to save him. They got him out of the car, gave him CPR, applied oxygen, but there was nothing they could do to fix his squashed brain. When they finally made it to the emergency room, doctors said the pressure put on Chen's brain was just too much for him to survive. 4. Assault in Alaska. An Alaska news anchor was arrested in October of 2020 for assaulting somebody in her station's parking lot. According to the report from the very station Maria Athens was working at, she was charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and criminal mischief. The news anchor was also banned from ever stepping foot on her station's property again. And yes, she lost her job. But the story is more complicated than that. Athens was in a bizarre relationship with the mayor of Anchorage, Ethan Berkowitz. They had been sending each other inappropriate text messages in 2016. In 2020, Athens came across some information that Berkowitz was allegedly posting inappropriate pictures of himself on a website for underage kids. She became enraged and threatened to expose him as a pervert to all of Alaska on the news. She even went so far as to post a photograph of Berkowitz's bare behind as proof of the allegations before she went live on the air. But before she ever had a chance to get on TV, she got into an argument with the station manager, who happened to be her boyfriend. They were driving around Anchorage when he kicked her out of his vehicle and said she was never allowed back at the station. But she went back to the television station anyway and beat the guy up in the parking garage. Then, when the police arrived to take her away, she hit a cop. We don't know how many of the allegations are true. We do know that shortly after the drama, Ethan Berkowitz resigned as the mayor of Anchorage. 3. Falling 3 stories. In February of 2022, a woman of just 25 had the worst motorcycle riding lesson in history. She tragically lost control of the motorcycle and drove straight off the top of a mall parking lot garage in Santa Clarita, California. She was being taught how to drive on the roof of the parking structure by a group of people who may or may not have been very good teachers. A spokesperson for the sheriff's office said one of two things happened. She either lost control of the motorcycle and threw herself over the edge, or she couldn't figure out how to stop. Whichever one it was, the end result was the same. She crashed into the low wall of the garage, went over the handlebars, and fell 3 stories to the hard ground below. Imagine the shock on the shoppers' faces outside Macy's when her body landed on the concrete below their feet. The unfortunate victim was treated at the scene and taken to the hospital, but there was nothing anyone could do to save her life. 2. Bad Memphis security guards. 2 security guards have been accused of assaulting a woman inside the very parking garage they were being paid to protect. It was October in 2021 when the woman and 2 friends parked in the First Parking Place garage in downtown Memphis. They left the garage and came back a little later to get their car. When they tried to get back into the garage, a security guard demanded $30 in cash. The woman refused to pay, saying she was being hustled, and everyone got into an argument. This was when the second security guard showed up pretending to be a police officer. He told the woman she would be arrested if she didn't leave, but when she asked to see his badge, he declined. He then became so angry that she wasn't being an easy victim and handing over the money that he slammed her on the ground and tried to put her in handcuffs. The first security guard has been identified as Lee Tops. The one pretending to be a cop is Matthew Jones. It was as the 2 men were struggling to handcuff the woman that a 3rd security officer was called in for assistance, Michael Taylor. According to what the victim told police, rather than simply handcuff her, the men lifted up her dress and put their greasy paws all over her before she finally managed to break free and get into her friend's vehicle. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Jones wouldn't let them leave. He stood in front of the car with his handgun pointed at them. But the victim and her friends were smart. They refused to leave the vehicle until Memphis police officers, actual cops, finally arrived. In the end, Jones was charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault and Taylor was charged with a misdemeanor assault. All they got was something equivalent to a 5-minute timeout. Tops never showed up for court and a warrant was issued for his arrest. 1. Tourism in California. A woman visiting the Bay Area of California as a tourist is probably never going back. In summer of 2021, the tourist, who refused to be identified publicly, parked her vehicle in the Bay Street Mall parking garage of Emeryville. When she returned to her car, she was attacked by a group of vicious men, carjacked, kicked, and punched. According to what she told ABC 7 News, it happened in the blink of an eye. Suddenly there were 2 men running at her, and in the next second she was on the ground and everything she owned was gone. She was left with 2 black eyes. This wasn't an isolated incident either. The Emeryville police said it was the 3rd robbery and carjacking in the parking garage since the end of spring, in over just 3 months. The perpetrators were never even caught.
Number 10. Millen Cyruss's meth problem. Millen Cyruss is a pretty big name in Indonesia. As a trans Instagram celebrity, she was looked up to as a role model in many different communities across the country, and indeed abroad. Her birth name is Muhammad Milendaru Prakasa, but she changed it after undergoing a series of operations. Alas, Millen turned out to be a pretty poor example of a role model. She was busted by the police in Jakarta as part of a drug sting. Local police were tipped off that there was some shady business going on at a hotel in North Jakarta. When they arrived, they found Millen Cyruss in possession of alcohol and crystal meth. Drugs are not something you want to mess with in Indonesia. This was instant jail time, but instead of being put in a woman's holding cell, Millen was shoved into a cell with men. All politics aside, it was a pretty poor move on the prison. Regardless of what her birth gender was and what her identity is now, she 100% looks like a woman and has the parts to go along with it. Putting her in a male cell proved instantly problematic, and they ended up having to put her in a special cell by herself to remain neutral. In the end, the whole point is that Millen Cyruss, a role model for many young people dealing with social issues, was doing meth in November 2020 with some shady characters in a greasy hotel room. Number 9. Inappropriate student relations. Stephanie Peterson was supposed to be a role model for her students. She was a middle school teacher in Smyrna Beach who went above and beyond in her work. She also decided to have an inappropriate relationship with one of her students. This was a truly bizarre case. Peterson was 27 years old when she committed the unbelievable act of undressing her 14-year-old student. She was sentenced in 2018 to spend 3 years in prison, then to be put on 2 years of community control, also known as house arrest. Plus, she'll now be registered as a sex offender for the rest of her life. She'll never be able to teach again, at least not in any school in the US. Stephanie ruined her life before she even hit 30, and quite frankly, she isn't anybody's role model anymore. If you're wondering how this could even have happened, let's start from the beginning. Stephanie Peterson and her student became entangled in a romantic relationship on November 1st, 2017. It continued until January 31st, 2018. They communicated through Snapchat, sending inappropriate pictures to one another. Stephanie Peterson would drive to his home at night. The student would sneak out of his parents' house and fool around with her in the driveway. She would also invite him over to her own house, and they sometimes met in a barn behind the student's house. Number 8. Henry Ruggs III. On November 2nd, 2021, Tina Tintor died from thermal injuries. Her death was directly caused by former Las Vegas Raiders player Henry Ruggs III. Henry was a major football star and role model for people everywhere, as most football players are. But just like so many other football players, Henry's personal life was kind of a disaster. He was driving his Corvette at 156 miles per hour when he crashed into Tina's RAV4. It was a dramatic accident that saw Tina's car explode in a fireball. She was trapped inside the vehicle with her dog, while Henry could do nothing but stand and watch as she and her pet burned to death. The coroner determined Tina was literally scorched alive, likely in the most agonizing way possible. She had nothing to do with sports. She was just going for a drive with her dog, and her life was brought to a tragic and unnecessary end by a football player who thought he could do whatever he wanted. Tina had dreams of becoming a computer programmer. She had worked for Target for 2 years before recently acquiring a better job at an insurance company. She was really working hard in life and trying to get ahead, and all that was taken away by Henry Ruggs, whose blood alcohol content was found to be over double the legal limit. Henry was officially charged with 2 counts of driving under the influence, causing death. However, he hasn't been given a sentence yet. He's been sitting on house arrest this whole time, living it up in his mansion. When his trial is finally over, he could be looking at 50 years of prison. Number 7. The perfect role model. An unruly airline passenger who was accused of groping and punching flight attendants had previously won an award for the perfect role model. The bizarre airborne fiasco happened in the summer of 2021 on a Frontier Airlines flight. The plane left Philadelphia at approximately 10:41 p.m. on a Saturday night, bound to land in Miami 2.5 hours later. Maxwell Berry from Ohio just couldn't sit in his seat and mind his own business for a measly 2 hours. Instead, he picked on the female flight attendants, repeatedly groping them as they went by. When one of the male crew members spoke up against his behavior, Maxwell punched him in the face. Well, things didn't go great for Maxwell. He had to be taped to his seat and was then arrested by the Miami-Dade Police Department upon landing. He was publicly embarrassed in front of the whole country. The truly ironic part is that, according to the New York Times, he won a college frat award for being the perfect role model and for leading the fight to dismantle fraternity stereotypes. Number 6. Aaron Hernandez. Just 2 weeks before Aaron Hernandez was arrested for murder, he claimed to be a role model for all Hispanic people. That may have been true when he was playing for the New England Patriots, but after he killed semi-professional football player Odin Lloyd, his status of role model was promptly revoked. Odin Lloyd was killed on June 17, 2013. He was shot in an industrial park, not more than 1 mile from the house of Aaron Hernandez. On the night before the incident, Hernandez texted 2 of his friends, asking if they could come to Massachusetts. He was saying something about losing trust in someone, and he was obviously quite upset. What his friends didn't realize was that he wanted them to help with a murder. The police investigation revealed that Lloyd and Hernandez had been in contact several hours before the killing and had gotten into some kind of argument over a bag of marijuana. It was also clear that Lloyd had said something Hernandez really didn't like, which threw him into a mad frenzy. He had his two friends come up to Massachusetts, and the three of them ambushed and executed Lloyd. On April 15, 2015, Hernandez was found guilty of murder. 4 days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, he was discovered dead in a cell. A star athlete and role model for millions turned murderer and corpse in the blink of an eye. What's the one case of a football star falling from grace that really shocked you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. Number 5. Bad school teacher. Yet another school teacher, someone who was supposed to be looked on as a role model by her students, has gotten into some major trouble. The only good news is that she wasn't messing around with one of her students. Instead, 40-year-old Laura Pollard Ramos of Winter Haven was arrested on March 12, 2021 for theft. What did she steal? It wasn't school supplies and it wasn't lunch money. It was $66,000 from her sick grandmother. Laura was made the power of attorney for her grandmother in 2013. Sadly, her grandma was having difficult times with her health. She trusted Laura to write checks as needed to take care of her. In October of 2020, the family checked in to see how the grandmother was doing financially and found that she had a negative balance in her account. The police investigated and learned that Laura had been gradually draining her account for years. Between November of 2018 and November of 2019, Laura siphoned $66,836, bringing her grandmother's account to a balance of negative $193. This is a woman who was supposed to be teaching kids how to grow into adults, and yet she was stealing from her own family. Definitely not a very good role model. Number 4. Instagram role model's mega fraud. Instagram role model and influencer Kayla Massa was arrested on February 13, 2020. At just 22 years old, Kayla had managed to build herself quite a fan base, with young people all over the country admiring her extravagant lifestyle. Yet, as it turned out, her lifestyle was nothing to admire. She was charged for committing bank and wire fraud, stealing $1.5 million from her followers. People were looking up to this woman, and in return, she was robbing them. Kayla scammed her victims using her Instagram stories. She shared pictures of her bank balance, huge stacks of money, people flashing bank cards, and things like that. Basically, she made it look as though she were super rich. She then made all her followers believe it was easy to make all that money. She said that if anyone following her wanted to make legal money easily, just send her a message. She informed everyone who sent her a message that they could earn $5,000 by doing one thing. They only need to send her their debit card and PIN number. This, of course, was so that she could deposit the cash into their account. She even said that if they weren't comfortable, that they could drain their account first of all the money they had. Kayla said it was all about tax write-offs. Her friend who owned a business would use their card to deposit money, and they would get paid for helping. Nobody got paid for anything except Kayla. She scammed these people and drained their bank accounts. What makes it so much more tragic is that it was mostly her followers 18 years old or younger. It was just young people who looked up to Kayla and wanted to make some money. They were the victims here. Number 3. The fall of an Olympian. Jeff Hugel was a major swimming star, an Olympian who won medals at the 2010 Commonwealth Games. He was a role model to all the young swimmers out there, which made what happened next so tragic. In 2014, after his marriage fell apart, he was arrested for possession of cocaine. After he'd retired from swimming, he'd picked up a bit of a drug habit. Jeff was actually with his ex-wife at the time of his arrest. They were watching the Randwick races in Australia together when they got pulled aside by the police and searched. The cops found cocaine on them, and Jeff's life was upended in an instant. He was publicly shamed, humiliated, and ended up leaving the country. When he did an interview in 2022 to talk about his turbulent past, he admitted to not seeing either of his daughters in 18 months. The possession charge just ruined his life. He had to make a new life for himself in Singapore with a new wife and a new kid. Number 2. Soccer Stars DUI. Abby Wambach was arrested in April of 2016 on a DUI charge. It happened late on a Saturday evening when she was pulled over for failing to stop at a red light. Portland police knew she was drunk right away. She failed the sobriety test and was brought to jail. Although she was polite and cooperative throughout the entire thing, she was still too drunk to be driving. Even once they got her back to the Central Precinct in downtown Portland, she failed the breathalyzer test. Now, many of you may not know who Abby is, so let me tell you. She was once a major women's soccer star. She retired from the US national team after they won the 2015 Women's World Cup. All these years later, she's still the all-time leading soccer player with 184 goals. She was a superstar and a role model for kids everywhere. But as we've already learned today, role models are often undependable. Abby was a great soccer player, but not so good at taking a taxi home instead of driving drunk. Number 1. Role Model Father. In June of 2019, an advisor to the California governor, Gavin Newsom, wrote an essay in which he called himself a role model dad. In the essay, Nathan Ballard wrote, "I believe I was put on earth to be a dad." He went on to talk about just how great he is with his kids and how great a role model he is for all the dads out there. In October of the next year, he was arrested and charged with domestic violence. He tried to suffocate his daughter with a pillow. As it turns out, pretty much anyone can write an essay about anything they want. But this is actually more horrific. According to the Napa County Sheriff's Department, Nathan not only suffocated his 4-year-old daughter, he also pushed his wife into a glass door. From what his wife Mara told the police, he had gotten angry at their daughter and decided to punish her by suffocating the child with a pillow. When Mara saw what he was doing, she went to intervene, and that was when she got shoved into the glass door. Nathan was booked on 2 charges of domestic violence, but released later that day after paying a $75,000 bail. Which of these people do you think is by far the worst role model? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, hit subscribe to help support the channel. See you next time. Bye!